Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
Girl, real talk. This whole "it's new year, time to reinvent myself" trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences. Discretion is advised.
It wasn't really about forgiving. It's not my place to forgive what he did to those families. I needed to let go of what he did to my family, or what I was saying when I was dying inside. I was rotting inside. I was rotting from that anger and that hurt and the trauma. It kills you internally. That's what drives him nuts. It drives him nuts that his daughter is over here writing and speaking. I'm not thriving, but I'm living. And I'm not over here talking about in minute detail what my father did, because it doesn't matter.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Welcome back to The Killing Hour with Doc Bonn. Last week we heard from Dennis Rader, BTK's daughter, KERRI RAWSON, in a very honest and revealing interview.
Today we're going to hear some more brutally honest insights from KERRI, who has struggled with what her father has done for most of her life, with part 2 of her interview with us.
But according to KERRI, she's finally learning how to heal herself by writing and talking about her experience. Her father's brutal crimes left many victims, and KERRI is also one of them. Without further ado, it's time to start The Killing Hour with Doc Bonn.
And not just from my father. I had lost my cousin that was like my sister in 96. I have dealt with anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation since I was 18. Now, some of that genetic from my father, probably, because I know my grandmother on that side dealt with some of this. Okay, but nobody bothered to tell me I had these genetics, and I'm almost suicidal to the point of killing myself my freshman year in college. This is years before my father, but that was after I saw him try to strangle my brother. I mean, I literally shut down my freshman year of college. I almost flunked out. I was an AP student, and I barely made it through college. And all of this was before he was arrested. So you know how many years it's taken me to go back in therapy and writing and go back and figure out what was wrong with me and realize this kid has probably had PTSD since the neighbor lady was murdered by my father when I was 6. You know how much time that takes? So over the last 8 years, even if I inadvertently stepped into speaking, like you were saying, it empowers you when somebody actually is willing to listen to you and let you talk and share what this is and can deal with it and not give you the dumb funeral face, the grief face, or tell you to shut up or tell you they're going to have nightmares. Look, I have night terrors. I've had night terrors almost every night of my life. I still do. Okay. So don't tell me you're going to go home and have a nightmare over my father. I literally live by myself now with a night terrors every night. That's my reality. I'm not going to tell that to everybody. I'm not going to sit down, like I said, in a group in Bible study and say my dad murdered children. I mean, it's even hard to when people are like, you're on an airplane or something. They're like, what do you do? I'm a writer. What do you write? Oh, great. I mean, I'm just finishing up a divorce now. Okay. So I'm over on a dating app now. How do I go date as this guy's daughter? I'm literally over on Twitter talking about that now, because when do you tell somebody whose kid you are? But if I'm not going to do it, who is? Because there's not very many of us.
No.
I mean, most of us hide for decades and then we die. So somebody has to do it. So I'm the loudmouth that's doing it. So of course, it comes with Instagram.
Absolutely.
But
yeah, I mean, I'm sure it makes it a little easier with all the social media to kind of communicate with people and just be able to sift through to see who it is. Then you can kind of
I filter. But I literally have on my social media profile, best-selling author. Yes, I'm BTK's daughter, because I'll literally get people asking me in Twitter, are you really his daughter? And I'm like, oh my freaking God. So I literally just put it in my profile. Like, I'm his kid. Yes, I look like him. Get over it.
Earlier, you said that at one point you said you had forgiven your father. And at what point did you do that? And how did you do it? And then did you rescind that after you've cut him off?
So I grew up Lutheran, but it was sort of a forced going to church thing. And I walked away from my faith. Then I found God down in the Grand Canyon hiking with my father. We almost didn't survive that trip. I almost took my life out. I almost killed my dad. I mean, I almost left him. He was so whiny by like day 5. That whole thing is in my book. So anyway, I became a Christian. And it was hard for me when I went back to church in 2006. There were 6 years of doing Bible study and being in small groups. And I mean, I even shared my story and said, look, I haven't forgiven my dad. As a Christian, I know we're called to, but I haven't. And then I was kind of working on that over the fall. I was laid up with a broken leg, chasing like a 1-year-old. I don't know. We would say, as a Christian, I would say God was working on me. And I had been to a movie in December, not mid-December, and I was driving home, and it was literally like, just like God hit me almost like a light. And I pulled over and I was sobbing, and it was like I had released it, forgiven him. And I went home and I wrote in like a 6-page letter after not talking to him for 5 years. And at the bottom, it's in my book, at the end of my book, my first book, you see where I share that part where I tell him, like, I forgive you. And if you've accepted Christ, or you will, I'll see you in heaven someday. So of course that pisses people off, but it wasn't really about forgiving. It's not my place to forgive what he did to those families. I needed to let go of what he did to my family, or what I was saying when I was dying inside, I was rotting inside. I was rotting from that anger and that hurt and the trauma. It kills you internally. And when you don't talk about it, now, not everyone is going to heal the same way as me, but me thinking not talking was the answer. It wasn't, because I was dying. And as soon as I forgave my father, my husband, he said she was BTK's daughter. And as soon as she forgave her dad, she came back to KERRI. I came back to that old young person who I'm still coming back into now, as I'm becoming stronger and becoming the me I was always supposed to have been before dad happened. Dad happened means 05. Dad happened. So again, after he was being such a narc in the newspapers in 2014, I had to go and forgive him again. So literally the book I'm writing about now is about the media, about forgiving him again, about communicating with him, going back into therapy, this whole journey I've been on now. I do sincerely believe I've let most of that go, but it comes and goes, because it's real hard when you're back in therapy or you're reading down to the details, because I didn't really know my dad's crimes. I didn't know the details until 15, but to go right, and they said, you have to include the crimes. And I'm like, okay, well then I got to go learn them. There's sort of that warring inside, back and forth. Like, most days I don't think about him too much, or if I do, he's just my dad, or I miss my dad. Like, I was sending pictures to a friend the other day. She was asking about my treehouse. And I was like, oh, well, there's my dad. So he's always just dad to me. But then like on Monday, I run into his death mask. I have a panic attack. I have PTSD that's affecting me for days. I'm pretty angry at it. Yeah. But Scott would say, you don't even want to tell that to him. You don't want to give that back to him, because that would empower him and make him think he has power. And I don't know if we've talked about that, but so Red Dragon, which was the Before Silence of the Lambs by the same author, it was loosely based on my father's Otero murders. And stuff like that empowers my father. Like, it gives him power. It makes him feel empowered, like he's sure. Like the Red Dragon.
Because he has a platform.
Exactly.
Right. But I mean, my father was watching the Red Dragon with me long before he was arrested, knowing that was based loosely off of him. So all of that stuff, some people would say, hey, you shouldn't be talking about it. You shouldn't be writing about it, because you're empowering him. And I'm like, well, there's other things to talk about other than what my dad did in 1974. I mean, we can talk about it if that's what you want to talk about. But like you said, let's talk about what it's like to be somebody like me.
Yeah.
That's what drives him nuts. Like, it drives him nuts that his daughter is over here writing and speaking. I'm not thriving, but I'm living. And I'm not over here talking about in minute detail what my father did, because it doesn't matter.
Yeah. One of the questions I have is, when we were dealing with the Ridgway's family and his niece, who actually worked for me at the time, one of the motivating factors of her wanting to confront her uncle and find out and do a documentary to kind of really figure out how they kind of missed all the steps is, she became a mother, and she was concerned that whatever kind of DNA that he had was passed on to possibly one of her children, because she had 3 or 4 kids at the time. And so that was one of the motivating factors. And in fact, she wanted to go and get a brain scan from this well-known scientist and doctor who studied brains of serial killers and mass murderers, and there was a commonality that have it. And ironically, the doctor who started the study found out that he had a killer in his family by doing his brain scan, because he found out his mother. So he goes, "Oh yeah, you had an uncle who was a mass murderer in the late 1800s." And so that does something like that scare you, being a mother, and the fact that you possibly those kind of traits could be passed on to your children or their children or anything like that?
I get asked that a lot. I don't think never really crossed my mind not to have kids because of it. In hindsight, it was more like, was I ready to have children as much of a trauma victim as I was? Because day to day, it's my trauma, my anxiety, depression, that kind of stuff, like my PTSD around the hurricane, even though it wasn't too bad where I'm at, it affected me for days. So for me, in hindsight, should somebody with my sort of mental health have been a mom? That is more my worry now. Like, how am I profoundly affecting my children? Or, more of the basic everyday, more normal mental health, what have I passed on versus that kind of stuff? It gets crazy, because if you are seeking medical care for your kids or for yourself, you're supposed to mark down, like, what do your parents have or your grandparents have? If I'm marking down on a chart how insane my dad is, there's going to be a side conversation, so do I do that? My son has gone through some pretty severe neurological stuff over the last several years. So that has come up in conversations as we've worked with specialists, on the side. When he's little, I've had to pull him out in the hall. Okay, I got this. This is, and everyone is saying, no, this isn't being passed on. This isn't something that's being reflected here. So, it goes back to what Scott was saying about my dad thinking he was born that way. In my opinion, something happened to my father when he was little that he's fairly suppressed or is so embarrassed and ashamed by that he will never talk about it, but he hints at it in some old poems. My guess is my father was maybe sexually abused, maybe by a distant relative or a stranger. My dad was left for a while with some like his grandparents and stuff in Columbus. Why? Because his mom, Dorothea, was very young. So she got married at like 16, 17. Grandpa was in the war. She raised my dad for a year while he was still overseas at Midway. So my dad has talked about some things with my grandma, but nothing really adds up there from what we know about my grandma. So again, isn't my dad making up stuff? But he has this whole thing about he saw chickens being beheaded when he was little. My grandparents, just killing chickens to eat. And he said he was sexually aroused by that when he was 4. Okay, is that possible? Or was he being sexually abused at that time? I don't know. That's where that nurture nature thing comes in, where something could have substantially happened to my father sometime when he was young that altered the course of his life versus his brothers. I don't know. The only person that has that answers are my father, and he's not talking about it. He likes to hint at things, but again, what is real and what's not. So I think it's harder in my reality to manage not only my own mental health and self-care, but also be a good mom, but also protect them. So we're pretty strict about social media. We don't let the 14-year-old on it, just for normal reasons. And also because of grandpa. We've been having conversations with my son, who somehow has full internet access at school, and he's been looking up things. I'm having to have conversations with him. I'm like, if you find me, in about 2 clicks, you're going to be on grandpa. You don't want to be there, because in 1 more click, you're on crime scene. So as we're raising them, when she was 5, she noticed she was missing a grandpa. I said, I have a dad. He's in jail, in prison. She didn't know what that was. I said, it's like a timeout. So as they've aged, we've tried to be as open as we can at their age, and we would check and say, what do we think you can handle? My daughter doesn't even want to watch Stranger Things. So is she going to be able to handle what grandpa did? No. Should she have to? No. Like, can I stop my son from Googling his mom? No. Can I keep them off social media until they're legally of age? Yes. So anybody is protective as a parent. We just have to be protective, and then you run into these things in school, like now a teacher freaks out on you, or they think, well, maybe your family's abusive because your father is, it's so crazy. So
it's unending.
So most days, I'm mom and writer, and and then other days I'm dealing with dad. And I think the hardest thing for me is he has no concept. It doesn't connect, whatever that is. Maybe it is something physically in the brain, but it's like it doesn't go all the way home. There's no all the way home there. Like, there's no connection that what I did in 74 and then I had children was eventually going to catch up with me and impact all of my generations going forward, and all these generations, because I decided to step in the Otero house. And he has full control over it. He's not he's not psychotic. He's not insane. I mean, that's why he didn't get caught for 31 years. He's decently intelligent and he has full control. He knows right from wrong. So don't tell me just because he's a psychopath or sociopath, he doesn't know right from wrong. He knows it and he still does it anyway. That's what makes him a sociopath.
He just doesn't care.
He doesn't care. But he's so compartmentalized, cube. He never wanted me or my mom or my brother or anybody that he knew and loved to know this about him. Like, that brings him great shame. When we're talking about that narcissist, it's like this dual war inside my father of wanting to be known as this infamous bad person and never wanting the people that he loved and protected to ever be anywhere near that. But the fact that he was not cognitively aware of what he had done to my family from 74 on, it doesn't go home. There's no way. And now he's like, older, he's 77. I think he probably has some dementia. There's no way. You're not going to reach him.
In his letters to me, he said, Scott, I'm fundamentally a good man. He said, I'm capable of bad things, but I'm fundamentally a good man.
Yeah, it's a quote.
What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, it goes back to that 90-10. If you're on the investigator side and you're having to notify people that their family's dead and you're having to go into these crime scenes and you're having to be around people like my father and other people worse than my father for decades, and you've spent your life investing trying to find my father, and it's ruined your marriage, or led you to drinking or whatever, of course you're going to go 90-10 BTK dad. He innately decided he wanted to be good. He wanted to be good. He didn't want to be what he was. Now, he made a choice. He made a choice every time he did these things, but he had the ability to turn it off. So he would route it into lesser activities like stalking. So there was 50-some, he kept notorious Nazi-like records. So they had to go track down on these like 50-some women he had stalked that were potential murder victims. And they had to make sure they were all alive, that they were safe. So most of the time he would route it into something that was lower level risk for him. And it was enough to fulfill that need, that whatever that drive is that makes somebody want to murder like him, that was enough. That sexual sadistic side, it was in the stalking, he said he actually really enjoyed more. And he enjoyed the planning more. My dad was a huge planner for like vacations, trips. He was the best planner, like had everything planned out. He was wonderful to vacation with, but he was always more excited about the planning, like planning the garden, getting the seeds, doing the drawings for the gardening. So he was more into the planning and the thinking about the murders. And sometimes that was enough. And then he says in Ramson's book, he would reach this point where he would like boil up, like a pot boiling, and he finally had to explode. And then he says he couldn't help himself. But my guess is that I wonder if he felt remorse after that happened. I don't know. I don't know if my father's ever really felt remorse for what he did, or even has a really understanding. It's almost like he so dissociates and disconnects. It's like he's not even aware that he's harming a human, and he's so disassociated and disconnected from my family as BTK. It's like he said over and over, I don't understand why you don't write me, call me, why you're not normal with me. Because for him, he's always been Dennis Rader, dad, and BTK since 1974. So to him, he thought we were living with BTK, right? So he doesn't understand why the massive disconnect in 2005. that's where, again, it does not come home. Like he
Well,
was like, you were fine with me yesterday, because to him, he was always the same guy. Like the duality, he's always lived in that duality place.
And he fashions himself as a victim too, because if God, made him this predatory beast that has made him ostracized by society, then he therefore is a victim himself, and that's the way he sees it. I mean, he's expressed that that to me, that poor me.
I know, but he could have walked in anytime into a police office, like a police station or a mental hospital, before the Oteros, and he could have left the Oteros. So this is how the narcissist justifies it. He says, well, I was in the Otero's house and they saw my face, so I had to put them down like they were animals. Put them down, what compliance officer term. I had to put them down. And there's if you read Ranson's book, there's direct interviews of his memories of being in those crimes, where, like, he says, I had to take care of the man first. I wasn't after the man, I was after the women. And if you go back and you watch his videos from his trial when he was guilty, he thought he was just going to have to say, I'm guilty. And the judge was like, no, you have to give us some details to prove it was actually you. And he was put on the spot. He wasn't prepared. And he doesn't even always remember the victims' names or their addresses. Mr. Meticulous Details is put on the spot and can't even remember things. But you can see where he's trying to like fudge, and he starts getting like really turned on by talking about it, and then he tries to cover it. So I know my dad well enough. Like, he even changes his voice. So we were talking earlier about him putting on uniforms and masks. Okay, so now he's in a court, he's around police officers, lawyers, judges. So he's changing his voice to sound like he's reporting crimes while he's in court, which when he called in the 7th murder, he called in Fox's. There's audio of it. You can hear him calling it a homicide, which is a really rare word to have used back then. He said, I'm calling it a homicide, because he's masking to sound more official to who he's talking to. So he would change. So like when we were in the Grand Canyon, we run into a ranger who's just checking permits and, checking on everybody, making sure we're doing okay. My dad's body language would shift. So if, like, say someone's in a uniform or standing military-like or police-like, my dad would shift instantly to mirror that person, to make that person feel more comfortable. So he didn't even do it with clothes he would do it with his face and his voice and his body and all this stuff I know in hindsight. But like, we fished all the time, and when they would come around to check, he would put on this like folksy friendly thing, or he would put on that like police officer air, So, and I don't think it was an intentional thing, like in his brain saying, okay, I'm dad now, I'm guy out fishing now. I think he just does it. I think it's like a chameleon. Like it's just, he just does it. I don't think it's an intentional thing.
Well, that is a hallmark of a real, profound psychopath, is that ability to mimic and just seamlessly move from situation to situation and present in what they believe is the best light. Right.
And that's another reason he never got caught, is because people always say your dad wasn't that smart. Okay, he wasn't so smart about how he got caught, but he truly is a true psychopath in his ability to mirror and mask and fit in perfectly. And I mean, I'm literally talking about, like, when I was at K-State, he loved the football games. So he would like full invest himself in something new. And it was down to like the purple hat, all the college colors, stuff on the van. I mean, meticulously, but it wasn't like it was not like there was this thing in his head saying, I don't think there's a thing in his head that says, okay, what does this person look like? I mean, maybe there is. He just was that way. I don't know him any different.
So he's like a chameleon. He could just fit in anywhere.
Like, and the nicest guy when he wanted to be, like the most helpful Boy Scout leader, volunteer. I mean, honestly, like my husband said, God, you had a better childhood than our kids, because like my mom cooked these nice dinners all the time. Again, it was a generational thing, but I had these great vacations.
Girl, real talk. This whole it's new year, time to reinvent myself trash is not the vibe for 2024. You can find someone who loves you for you, as you are. You don't need to read a stack of self-help books, only eat sad salads, or like start meditating at 5 a.m. to be ready for dating. So yeah, my advice is to download Bumble and find someone who embraces you the way you are right now. Let me know how it goes.
Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
I did all this amazing stuff with my father. I mean, he was like the go-to guy. If you needed something, he was your man.
Did your mom handle this when she found out? I just feel so, I can't even imagine what she went through.
So she has PTSD similar to me because like the police basically almost broke into her house and tried to remove her because they didn't know. They didn't know if she was involved. They didn't know what, and my dad had rigged up the house and they took her down to the station. Didn't really tell her much. They knew pretty quickly. Like there's stuff in the Wichita Eagle book with the interview with her. Like they knew pretty quickly that she didn't know anything. They said they were pretty devastated. Like they realized really quickly talking to my family that first day that there was another victim family on their hands. You know, they had been working with these other victims' families for decades in some cases. Now they have a new family. That really hurt, really injured the detectives to realize they had another family. My mom ended up at my aunt and uncle's. They flew me into Kansas City so the media wouldn't find me in Wichita. And we ended up outside of Topeka. Like people said we were in hiding. We weren't really hiding. We were just at relatives. But I mean, we kind of dealt with it like you would after somebody died. That's how my mom's dealt with it. Like she said, so she had lunch with my dad every day for like 16 years when he was a compliance officer. So she was coming home that day to have lunch and she saw a helicopter and she said to herself, I wonder who they're after now. What was him? So he never came home for lunch. So she said to her initially, it was like he had died of a heart attack or something. So she disassociation and disconnected by really dealing with it like my father had died. It wasn't the healthiest way to deal, but we all deal with these things differently. So she it was really like we had all gathered for this funeral. But then she was on the phone with the pastor who was in with my dad a few days later in the prison. And she's writing down these insane notes that I talk about in my book about like sexual fetishes. And I'm seeing her write these words on this notepad because she was trying to understand what had happened. You know, so my dad's over here to the pastor trying to convey to my family what's wrong with him. So, I mean, he's already told the police he's guilty. We knew he was guilty. And so we wrote my dad letters for the first like 3 or 4 months saying, look, I mean, you see it in my book where I'm like, look, we know you're guilty. Can you please just take the plea and spare all of us? Because otherwise we would have had to go on trial. We would have had to been witnesses for those last 3. My mom for all of them.
Did she see anything in him? Like you're saying she was writing all these notes. That was after. After. Oh, so she didn't have any feelings or any kind of idea that he had weird fetishes or anything different?
No, there's some claims out there, again, in Ramson's book. So I have some issues with that one, just where supposedly she ran into my dad dressed up in his bondage stuff or his women's lingerie in the 70s. My mom says she didn't. So like, who are you going to believe? The pathological liar or my mom? At this point, no one's going to push my mom. If she ran into her husband in the 70s in lingerie, would she have done anything about it? Again, does that lead to anywhere? I mean, she was like 23 when she got married. She had never dated anybody else. My dad had just got back from the military. She already knew his family. They met through church. He basically just swooped in, said he fell instantly in love with her. They were married within 9 months. So after he was arrested, of course, like my grandparents, my great aunts and uncles were beating themselves up for letting her have married him. But everybody thought he was an upstanding, wonderful man until he wasn't. So what are you going to do? Are you going to beat yourself up the rest of your life?
Yeah.
So, I mean, he in the 70s, like he got a job with ADT installing alarm systems after the Otero murders because everyone wanted alarm systems. So he was doing that during the day. So he was in people's houses, casing them, doing small-time burglary. And then he was going to college at night. She was working full-time.
Yeah.
I mean, did she ever wonder why was he not home? She said she would call his buddies sometimes. She assumed they were out drinking or on a night job or he was studying. I mean, my father literally took criminal justice. He has a degree in criminal justice from WSU. He He literally was sitting in the criminal justice classes learning about the BTK cases that he had committed. I mean, that's who my father is.
Yeah.
So, I mean, after the Bright murder, the one with the multiple stabbings of this young woman, because everything went to haywire because there was her brother was involved. Like he buried the bloody clothes in the chicken coop. He has a thing with chickens at my grandparents' house, and the gun and the knife, and then went back later and disposed of them. Obviously, my father had come home to my mother covered in blood, but he didn't. She said, there's been stories where she told me one time he had some scratches on his back. Now, was that from a woman fighting him off? It very well could have been. He said it was from installing wires in an attic. He was an immaculate liar, immaculate, narcissistic, classic cover. I can't lie to save the day. You'll see it in my face. My father, no. And he had alibis. He used the scouts twice for the 2 murders by my house. So he had cover. I don't know. I mean, you could sit here and beat yourself up, but why would you do that to my mom?
Yeah, no, I understand.
She's victimized too.
Of course.
She
Absolutely.
had to live with me for 30.
She was a complete
years.
victim. I mean, I feel so sad for her. It must have been heartbreaking.
Yeah.
That's awful.
We just have like about another 9 more minutes. You've given us so much of your time and I appreciate it. Just one last question I would love to ask you. What's it going to be like when he passes on, when he dies? What's it going to be like for you? Is it going to be relief? Is it going to be sad? I mean, are you preparing for yourself for when that happens?
I don't know. I mean, so when, what was it? When the guy from Afghanistan with the 9/11 bombing, sorry, my brain's fried. But when somebody infamous dies, you get a lot of social media like ding dong, the witch is dead.
Oh, yeah.
So I've been waiting every day for that because I hear my dad's in poor health and he holds that over us. Like, well, I'm in poor health and I'm ill and sickly, and he holds anything he can over us still. So I'm still waiting for that day I find it on social media before somebody calls me. I mean, that's the reality of my life now. I mean, maybe somebody they're supposed to let our family know, but my guess is I would find out through the media. I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to grieve the man that I lost and I still love that guy. And people are like, you're insane to say you still love him. And I'm like, well, put yourself in my shoes for 5 seconds. When you had a pretty much good father that occasionally, could be hard on you, and then you lost him. I lost my father at 26. So yeah, it's going to suck when he dies. But also hopefully the cyber stalking and stuff goes away too. Or that power my father still has over people, or it'll give the families a release, I would hope. I mean, honestly, I don't even know if I could be around the families because I look like my dad so much. Would that bother them? So I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to grieve him, and then I'll probably yell at people for celebrating his death. And I spoke about that before, about look, I'm not defending these people, but they have a family, it's like we get sometimes forgotten, people like me. It's like the outside world blames us. They think we had something to do with it, that we're bad. Right now I'm dealing with this idiot on social media that thinks I have a criminal past, a criminal history, a criminal heritage, because of something my father did that mainly he did before I was even born. I didn't choose to be born to this guy. I didn't choose any of this. My mom didn't choose any of this. And I mean, you asked how my mom handled it. Well, she wrote him letters. And then as soon as he pled guilty, she cut him off. And she got an emergency divorce, and she's never spoke to him since because she said, I'm done with you. She wrote him letters for 4 months. He pled guilty. She heard it in his words. That's all she needed. Cut him off. Never spoke to him again. And he still writes her, or he used to. I don't know if he does anymore, but he was still writing her, and she was still reading letters from somebody she considered a dead man. So take that to therapy.
Yeah.
But that's how mom dealt with it.
Awful.
She had to deal with it in her own way.
Yeah. And she has always said it's actually easier for a spouse because they're not related. They don't have his DNA. They don't have his blood. They weren't raised. So I think as much as she felt betrayed and just completely blown over, it was easier for her to cut him off and be done. And it's never been that easy for me or my brother. It will never be, because he's your dad. He was like my hero. He was our hero. So it was easier for her to just be done. And she never dated again. Never had anything to do with a guy again. She would never trust anyone.
No, knowing that he is in declining health, and also recognizing that recently you had to cut him off and get a restraining order for your own safety. Can you imagine a time where you would want to sit down with him or say goodbye in any way?
No, I can't handle it. I can barely handle looking at him. I can handle family photos now if I'm prepared for them. That man, I'm sure I have some unhealthy disconnection and disassociation. I know I do. And I literally have to anchor myself. Like on Monday when I was spinning, I'll literally think I'm back February 25th, 12:30 p.m., 2005. And I'll have to say, no, it's 2022. You live in Florida. Look, there's palm trees. That's literally what I have to do now, 17 years later. So do you know how much therapy it would take for me to have to go see him? I couldn't do it because I've done that cleaving too, before and after Dad and BTK. I would literally be scared of the man because I still have nightmares where I wrestle him, and I have night terrors of somebody attacking me in my bed like he did to my neighbor lady. Like, I'm still replaying that, and I've been doing that since I was little. Don't even explain that. Where does that come from? Nobody knows. So yeah, he's my dad and I love him, but I'm still scared of him. So why would I put myself, and I don't do well around police. I don't do well around guns. My dad had guns, and I don't do well around uniforms. Even uniforms can set off my PTSD. So why would I put myself through prison, and I can't even be in person with him and be over video monitor? Why would I do that? For him? No. So maybe I have, people were like, well, maybe you haven't forgiven him if you won't do that for him. I don't owe him anything. I owe him nothing. I'm trying to live and function over here.
Yeah, you're doing
not putting
a great
myself
job
through it.
KERRI. I mean, honestly, writing the books and working through all this stuff, it's really a testament to your spirit and the strength that you have. And you need to, keep that in mind. And all these people coming at you, trolls and weird people with their weird fetishes and stuff, that's on them, has nothing to do with you.
And you're helping people all
you're
over the
helping
world.
people understand what it's like to be a victim like you are a victim of this, and B, to understand what happened here.
I mean, I guess one thing would be interesting to interview, not me, but you guys, to interview somebody that does do murder memorabilia collection, like to explain that if they're willing, and not be like, okay, you're weird.
Yeah, I had an experience with, I interviewed Charles Manson.
Yeah.
In 1999, and the correctional officers took me to his, because they would confiscate everything he would make. He was a very talented artist. He would make these scorpions out of sock thread, and he would paintings, really, really kind of, and he had a bunch of wealthy benefactors outside prison, even lawyers at some point, that would kind of usher that stuff out and try to sell it. And they would catch a lot of it, but sometimes corrupt correctional officer would get it out and it would make it to the marketplace, but they couldn't understand it, why people would want this stuff from such a person who did so much evil. But yeah, to me, it's fetishism. It's like anything else. It's like people who collect Hitler memorabilia, Nazi memorabilia, anything that has some sort of notorious evil connotation to it. And it just feels like because they would never be able to, they want to touch the flame. Everybody wants to touch the flame.
That's right. By the way, Jeffrey Dahmer's eyeglasses are currently on auction for $150,000.
Oh my God. It's insane. That's insane to me.
We were talking earlier about trying to rehab these guys. Say they come in with a conduct disorder in their teens, or they've been in juvie. Some of it, I think, is art, is a way to rehab these guys. Like, okay, so my father says that he was supposed to be left-handed. I'm left-handed. My son's left-handed. I think my father was supposed to be left-handed. And he said that in kindergarten, they literally put his hand behind his back, maybe tied it. I mean, literally, that's where some of the bondage could come from. If some kindergarten teacher all fancied up, put his arm behind his back. I mean, could it be that? As simple as that? Maybe. So if you're taking somebody that's supposed to be left-handed and you're forcing them to use their right hand, their brain's going to get messed up. So my father was meant to be an artist. He loves art. He was always drawing, always sketching. It's part of his whole BTK thing, yes. But nobody ever cultivated that in a kid in the 40s or the 50s. They just wouldn't. They wouldn't let a boy do art like him. Not in a farm family. You hunt, you fish, you camp. You're man. You don't do art. So art for these guys, it's like they almost all do art because they need some kind of outlet. Do they need collectors? I don't know. But a lot of them seem to have that same outlet of like a healthy way. Could somebody have steered my dad towards art or helped him learn how to write with his right hand? My father has some writing issues, some language issues. Is that because he was made to use the wrong hand? I mean, again, now we're catching those things and we're trying to take care of people, like the whole person, versus just like beating them up for being an artist or something.
Yeah. Well, this has been fascinating. We really appreciate you kind of taking a glimpse into all of this through your perspective, because I think it's very valuable. I think you are helping people. We applaud you for what you're doing and your strength, because I don't think anybody can possibly be, I mean, we've met other people, similar people in your shoes, but it's a testament to your character and your willpower and your psyche that you're able to live a relatively normal life in crazy circumstances.
I mean, some of that is due to my father, like, because he raised me to be a tomboy. He raised me to be tough. He never treated me like a girl. My mom did. I hated dresses. My father let me climb trees and he took me out hiking and camping, and you're a boy now, you're going to get cold and wet and you're going to eat. You're going to learn how to clean fish. And, like literally I got to do whatever dad did, I mean, that's a huge part of where my internal strength comes from, is my father. And I legitimately believe my father I called it toughening school. I legitimately believe he was trying to toughen me up, expecting something like this to happen. Now, did it stop him? No, but I think he legitimately was trying to toughen me up. I don't know. Some people might argue with that, but like, that's what I miss the most, is having that companionship, of having that. I've never had that sense of having somebody to just do things with and run with. And he had such a zest for life, just loved everything. And I've never met anybody like that. I mean, people just want to focus on what he did and who he is now. But I don't know that guy at all. I mean, I've tried to learn about him as much as I can, but that's not who I know.
Your honesty is so moving. I mean, it's really powerful, and you really help us to understand that these individuals are not one-dimensional. The media loves to portray them as these evil monsters. And that there may be that aspect of it. In terms of the deeds. But you help us to really understand a much fuller picture, and I respect and thank you so much for your honesty and your willingness to dig deeply into these emotions, which I'm sure it has to be very painful.
It is, but it's gotten better. I mean, there were things I didn't even talk about before I was done writing. I had never verbalized. Writing is a safer, easier place for me. And all of a sudden I was filming documentaries. So I'm just bawling on the investigation discovery one, because it was the first time. I mean, I spent 6 or 7 hours talking to them in one day, and they gave me breaks, but I was just bawling on that one because it was the first time I even said BTK, really, so I've gotten a lot better at it, but there's still those little spots that will hit me, and it will hit that true emotion that I don't even know is in there. So I mean, I could be in therapy the rest of my life, but who wants to be? I mean, I literally was back in it last year and I was so bored. I was like, here's my book, go read it. You have homework too. Then let's deal with what I'm dealing with now. I don't want to go back 40 years.
Yeah.
And maybe I do need to, but who wants to spend the rest of their life in therapy talking about dad? I don't.
No.
When sometimes this is therapy. And this helps people. Me sitting in therapy doesn't help anybody but myself.
Exactly.
I don't know. I mean, this is a life I have. I had to decide years ago after I became public, what am I going to do with it? Okay, you've got one life. This is your life. What are you going to do with it? So I'm trying to do something with it.
Yeah, and you are. And we appreciate your time, and we appreciate you speaking with us. And
absolutely. Thank you so much, KERRI. I think this is really important work that you're doing, and you're an amazing person because you've pushing through and you want to get health. You want to be free of this, because it's not.
You're never free.
I know.
You have to. I had to reach a point years ago of deciding, okay, I'm never going to completely be healed. I'm never going to completely be normal or average, whatever the freak normal people are that I'm not. Okay, am I going to let myself rot and die, or am I just going to learn to live with it? And again, maybe I live in duality like my father. Like, being in that duality of being this guy's kid, and then me. And a lot of my newer explorations in my book now are about that, about trying to find KERRI again and being this guy's daughter. And, so I live in that same duality as he gave me, but I'm trying to do it for good. So.
And it's truly a journey, not a destination.
Yeah, it is. It's a journey. And that's something you really have to get to, is that you're not ever going to be fully healed. You're not ever going to fully understand. You're not ever, I want to know why. I want it. And there isn't, I don't think we're ever going to have answers fully on my dad or on these guys. Maybe eventually, I don't know. But if we each keep contributing, maybe eventually we will get somewhere with it.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
I remember talking to, a top surgeon once, and he actually said to me, emotion is entropy. I've hunted it to extinction down the years. You don't get much cooler and calmer and colder, I suppose, than that.
Doc Bonn is taking his serial killer expertise on the road this spring in a live theater event. To purchase a ticket to The Psychology of Serial Killers and Why They Captivate Us, go to psychologyofserialkillers.com. That's psychologyofserialkillers.com to find out when Doc Bonn's going to be in your city.
All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.